As a beginner artist, there's one thing you know for sure. You need to learn a lot. However, what they rarely tell you is the things you should avoid, the things you shouldn't learn. And in today's video, I'm going to discuss 5 art methods or perceived fundamentals that you should actually avoid in your learning journey. Because these are 5 art methods that I actually also have rarely used in my professional career. But especially as a beginner, you should avoid them. So we'll get into it. Number 1 is Bridgeman. And I know I can already see you staring at me. The death stares of like, what, Bridgeman? Legendary Bridgeman? Yes, Bridgeman is legendary, but he's not for you when you're a beginner. Now, to give you a bit of framing, what we're going to do for each method is we're going to give you 1, what it is, 2, why you should avoid it in your beginning early stages, and 3, what are better alternatives when you're starting out in your art journey. So, again, Bridgeman. What is Bridgeman? Well, Bridgeman, George Bridgeman, the legendary artist and teacher that specifically taught figure proportion, figure anatomy to some degree, but especially dynamic figure drawing. He's a master at it, don't get me wrong. The problem with Bridgeman, and it's the reason that sort of goes into immediately why you should avoid it, is that it's incredibly complex. So I boast about learning form all day. I can do that all day. I can do that every day. Form is king when you want to be able to draw from imagination, but even when you want to draw figures. Now, what Bridgeman does, he takes that to the extreme level, meaning that he's making such complicated interlocking forms beautifully. But when you're starting out, this is way too much information at once because we have this principle at Artwod, which we call anatomy-informed shape manipulation, right? It's basically taking certain shapes of simplicity like this, a cylinder, 2 cylinders, and a cut-off box, and we slowly move it towards something that resembles anatomy a little bit more. And then maybe even a little bit more till we have it like interlocking, till we do form combination and some form manipulation. And then eventually we can create things that look anatomically correct or at least believable, which is far more important. Now, when it comes to Bridgeman, he takes this to the nth degree. He makes it so incredibly complex, albeit incredibly informed and anatomically correct, but it will just completely confuse you. And what I see a lot of beginners do when they copy Bridgeman is they copy everything from the Bridgeman books. They copy the lines verbatim, but they actually don't really understand the forms underneath. They don't understand the interlockingness, if that is a word, of these forms, how he tries to build these forms. And it's something that Bridgeman just inherently had, I think, as an artist, but even he had a hard time articulating how it really works, how he really wanted to have forms interlock with each other. So he, to the best of his abilities, he created a framework that is legendary and that everyone since then has built upon, but it is an incredibly complex one with very hard to understand shapes that take quite a bit of advanced thinking and knowledge. And that's why, as a beginner, you should actively avoid it because the only thing it's going to do is it's going to confuse you. And when I see beginners copy Bridgeman, they just copy the poses from the book verbatim, but they have a really hard time then rotating that in perspective and drawing it from imagination. Rightfully so, because it is extremely complex. Now, if you take that to the other side, what we do and other resources do is we take simplicity first. Because what you want to do, what you want to be able to do, especially drawing from imagination, because you have to frame it this way, in the era of Bridgeman, drawing from imagination wasn't that big of a thing. I mean, maybe comics were around already, or we were at the verge of comic drawing, imaginative drawing. But overall, it was more reference-based. We were heavily relying on reference to make our drawings. And because of that, it was somewhat easier to get away with the complexity of Bridgman's drawings because you still had a frame of reference literally in terms of anatomy. However, when we want to draw from imagination, we first need to just draw simplicity from imagination. And when we can draw simplicity from imagination, then we can make that more complex. And we can move the complexity scale up and down based on our level of understanding. And that's essentially the entire beginner road at Artwod in one sentence, right? We move the complexity up, keeping your understanding of how to draw things from imagination as high as possible. So this can go for anything, right? I'm looking at anatomy now because we're comparing it to Bridgman, but it can be anything. It can be how you break up a motorcycle or a vehicle or a landscape. If you can do it first with simplicity and then add complexity as you go along, but still keeping the understanding of how to rotate these things from imagination or have them in your mind's eye, as we'd say, without losing that complexity, that's when you get really powerful at drawing from imagination. If we look at sort of the pro level of what I just described, that would be Kim Young-gi, because Kim Young-gi could do this in a very complex level. He wasn't drawing boxes and cylinders anymore in any orientation that he wanted. He was actually drawing incredibly believable and imaginary stuff because he had such a big visual library and he understood the simplicity of the forms he was building very, very well. If you want to have more information on this, I have a video on that subject about how to draw like Kim Young-gi, which really relates to what I'm talking about here. So when it comes to anatomy, it's easier to just break things up in simpler shapes and then build up in complexity as you go along. Number 2 is Tim, better known as the Assaro head. So the Assaro head is, what is it? Well, it's basically the planes of the head, right? It is one of the most beautifully created designs on how to understand how light falls on top of a face. And for those of you that don't know, we have two parts to this face. We have the younger side, which has smoother planes, and then we have the older side, which has a little bit more plane breakups. And as I get older, I can see this happening as well. So it is very accurate. All right. Now, the thing or the problem with the Assaro head is that it is incredibly complex to understand. And what I see beginners do often is that they will copy the Assaro head verbatim and they will try to memorize these planes like they're a puzzle that they need to memorize, but then they don't really have the liberty to have fun with it, because just like with Bridgman, what you're doing here is a Bridgman equivalent. You're trying to Bridgman-esque, for a lack of a better term, the portrait, and then you're trying to draw this from imagination. Whereas, again, I'm always an advocate for simplifying things as much as we can. I have another video on this, but I want to reiterate what I talked about there, is that you can really simplify things with starting, for instance, with just how you can add a mask to a sphere and rotate that in different orientations so that you can understand how to draw a simplified head from imagination in many different angles. Then you can add the Loomis proportions to that, and then you can add the simplified facial features to that. So again, everything here in level 1, 2, and 3 stays incredibly simple. And then we can add some complexity with the Raleigh rhythms. I'm much more of a proponent for the Raleigh rhythms than the Assaro head, because again, the Raleigh rhythms can be very flexible. One, they don't have to be as accurate as the planes of the face from Assaro when you start learning them. And you can very much base them on what you've learned from Loomis and the simplified facial features. So when you combine this, you start understanding better on just where these planes could land. And the cool thing about this is once you unlock sort of this understanding of the Raleigh rhythms, drawing this guy is just adding some details here and there and magically making those planes come to life. And this is sort of the thing of building up from a foundation level instead of trying to mimic something very complex without actually understanding what's lying underneath, right? And so then you go to maybe a little bit more complexity in your facial features, and eventually you just draw the face, the portrait, but you don't really need a lot of understanding, especially when it comes to drawing, for the Assaro head and the planes of the head. Now, when it comes to painting, we need to understand plane changes, but we can do a lot of that with what we have here already. So if you're a beginner, and again, I'm talking to beginners in this video, avoiding this is smart. Right, off you go, Tim. Number 3, edge control. One of these things you'll see pop up everywhere. Like, you need to know your edges if you want to be a painter. And then every beginner painter starts with this edge control because they heard about it. They saw it on whatever tutorial. They saw it on blog posts. And they're like, oh yeah, I need to soften my edges. I need lost edges. I need form edges. I need sharp edges. I need all of this. Forget all of this if you have no clue on how to paint with proper value, how to understand the structure underneath of what you're painting, having a clear idea of proportions, having a clear idea of value, having a clear idea of light. All of this is far more important than edge control. Edge control is the cherry on top. All right. It's the thing that you can do to make something look more painterly. It's when you push and pull shapes literally in or out of the canvas. Right. I have this study that I did from John Singer Sargent, one of the kings of edge control. And don't get me wrong, it's fantastic if you can work with it. But you only do this when you have a solid understanding of everything else, because if you don't, what you're actually just doing as a beginner is you're just smudging shapes around, and then you're surprised that your painting looks muddy or incoherent, or there's no structure, or there's no three-dimensionality, or there's no believability. And the reason for that is that because you were focusing on something you shouldn't be focusing on at this stage. So when it comes to edge control, like, don't focus on it. If you want to, like, one day do a little bit of it in the, that's fine. But as a beginner, if you want to get efficient and you're serious about improving, focus much more on things like just value understanding, form. I'm the form guy, so I'll always be a proponent for understanding form and understanding how light is cast on form. And then based on that, how cast shadow works, how form shadow works, all of that. That's going to help you much more than edge control. If I had to make an analogy, it's very similar to thinking that this pen, which would be edge control, is going to make you draw better. Whereas in reality, it might make me draw prettier if I have a solid understanding of how to draw. It's not going to make me draw better, right? And edge control for me is a little bit the same. All right, moving on. Number 4 is color theory, and more specifically, like color palettes and color gamuts. This is something you'll see so often in beginner tutorials and people teaching people how to paint. And for me, if you're a beginner, it is completely useless. Especially because not all people are very intuitive when it comes to color, and I'll get back to that a little bit later. But also because it has to do with same thing with edge control. When we look at what color theory does, so what is it? It is basically looking at the color wheel and then seeing how we can make coherent color relationships. And for instance, color gamuts is taking something like a split complementary or an analogous or triadic color scheme, right? So it's basically looking at how we can mix and match colors and have a nice coherent feeling to colors. But here's the thing. We're taking the entire color wheel. So we're already taking something extremely complex, just like Bridgeman, just like Tim over there, and we're trying to work with it. And if you're a beginner, it's not a good idea. I really much more like the idea of doing it traditionally, like an atelier style, where your first introduction to anything with color is just monochromatic. So it's just either black and white or burnt umber, and that's it, and you just focus more on value than you do on actual color. And as you progress, you go to maybe like a Zorn palette, which is also very limited, and maybe a warm cool, so where you only use a bit of warm colors like yellows and reds, and some cool colors like blues or greens, and that's all you work with because it will one, it's limitation, so it will make you more creative, but it will also help you understand color a lot better than if you were to start with all of the colors available. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about the intuitiveness of color, and this is true, I've seen this so many times. It's, in my opinion, one of the reasons why women are much better at color than men. Again, my humble opinion, but I think it's because they have this intuitive nature of just doing it from a gut feeling. And there's even a saying that I've stolen from Jeff Watts is the best colorist in the world never learned color theory. All right. And what he means with this, what he means by this is that color is the most forgivable fundamental of them all. If you know how to do values, how to do composition, how to do design, how to do proportion, if you can do all of that, coloring on top is not as important. And what I mean by that is like it's not like color can't make or break a painting, but it's more like the people that do color really, really well, they don't really think about color. They understand everything else, especially composition and design and shape contrast and value contrast and light contrast, but they don't really focus on the color. They just feel the color, for lack of a better word. And I think someone like me, someone very analytical, that's why I suck at color, is because I think about color too much. I don't do it intuitively. And maybe that's why I'm rather good with like perspective drawing and form because I made it intuitive. And color, I've never made that intuitive to me. I always have to overthink it. And so if you, as a beginner, start with this incredibly complex color wheel and then try to find relationships within that color wheel, you're going to overanalyze everything and you're just going to get a bit, I'd say, discouraged when it comes to learning color. Now, I know that a lot of you just love color, and I know you add color, but if you do, just do it. Don't overanalyze it with the color wheel. That would be like my personal advice to you. All right. And then lastly, the grandfather of them all, the golden ratio, right? And I think in the circles of when it comes to the concept art and illustration industry, this is less of an emphasis, but I see this a lot in the fine art communities where they still like push golden ratio, golden ratio. And golden ratio is like it's like an old relic from the old masters, right? And it's not that it's not useful. They used it for a reason. But first, we'll tell you what it is. So the golden ratio is basically a mathematical ratio. And it's very closely related to the Fibonacci sequence. And so in short, what it is that if we take the, right, and don't lose me here, if we take the overall length of this, right, and we have the short side here and the long side here. Now, if we take A, the long side, and B, the short side, and we add them up and we divide them by the long side. So if we do A plus B, man, you guys are I'm gonna lose you guys here. So, and that's why I'm saying you shouldn't learn it, right? So we have the long side and the short side, right? If we do A plus B and divided by A, we get this mathematical number, magical number like 1618, right? Fine artists love this number. And this is sort of the ratio. And that ratio, you can see that in nature, you can see that in oceans and shells and flowers and all of that, right? So it has a very organic feeling to it, don't get me wrong. So if we divide this up, like we have the short side here and we have the short side here and then the short side here and short side here, right? And this is how we create that golden ratio. Very beautiful. It also, for those of you that love mathematics, it also is very related to the Fibonacci sequence. So if we have the Fibonacci sequence, is basically every preceding number gets summed up. So we have 0, 1, 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 5, and then 8, and then 13, and then 21, and so on and so on. And if we divide 21 by 13, we get very close to 1.61, blah, blah, blah. Right, so that's what it is. It's basically a mathematical sequence. Now, why isn't it useful? Well, probably just for the reason you just saw me do, right? It's very mathematical, and it's not a priority when you're a beginner. The reason you can use this is very similar to what I said about edge control. If you're very good at what you do, you can make things prettier or look more organic by using the golden ratio. But it is far more important to create an eye for composition. And creating an eye for composition comes from just doing intuitive composition, making things have nice balance, like a nice balance in the picture frame. Focusing on big, medium, small, focusing on form hierarchy, focusing on shape contrast, focusing on value contrast. All of these things are far more important. A photographer will not have a golden ratio raster in his viewfinder, okay? What he'll have is maybe like 1 or 2 lines to maybe frame whatever he's trying to capture. But even like a lot of photographers don't have this, right? They just have this intuitive sense of making a nice composition because they know what they want to focus on. And even in digital, they can just crop it to make it into a nice composition. So this overemphasis and this over-reliance on the golden ratio is useless in the beginning. Okay? And that's it. So to recap, do not focus too much on Bridgeman. Do not focus too much on Tim over there, the Assaro head. Don't focus too much on edge control in the beginning. Don't get hyper-focused on color theory and all the gamuts and all of the things that you can do there. Just focus on color intuitively, and do not waste your time too much with the golden ratio. Once you understand intuitive composition well enough, you can supplement the golden ratio into your paintings and drawings to give it that extra nice organic look. But overall, I wouldn't hyper-focus on it in the beginning. All right? As always, I hope this was useful to you. Happy drawing, painting, happy being creative, and I'll see you in the next one.